Hi there. This is part two of Islamic Civilization and the contributions that it has made to Western civilization, to humanity. Now, cultural influence, and I'll try to stick to my script and not make too many comments and then get lost in my passages. Now, Islamic civilization left the influence of the Seljuks and of the Mongols and Chinese via the Mongols in Persian art. The Mongols, despite the total destruction and havoc at times of entire societies, such as Baghdad, that they wreaked, greatly influenced the Persian miniatures and paintings. Now, those are an art form that mirrors political, cultural, and literary landscapes. They tell a lot of stories in a minimal amount of space. The very important zero and the Hindu numeral system in mathematics was taken from India, and that we now know as the Indo-Arabic or Arabic numeral system. This system replaced the rather cumbersome Roman system, which would be ill-equipped for our current needs, especially in today's world. Sebokht, an Assyrian Christian scholar and bishop, was the first to adopt and use the Indian notation symbols. In the mid-7th century, that Muslim polymath Al-Khwarizmi would further develop. Pope Sylvester II, he was born, I think, Geber Aurillac, then introduced this system to Christian Europe. He learned the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, and using the idea from the Islamic scholar at and forgive my pronunciation, Al-Qarin University, produced a reformed abacus which he brought to Christian Europe. See all that transferring going on there, all those trades. You see why we say that we're all standing on the shoulders of each other when it comes to civilization. This reformed abacus was efficient and could not only do calculations quickly, but also complex ones that the one that was previously using the Roman system could not. Islam left much influence in India. Through earlier Islamic rulers and later the Mughals, Islam influenced architecture, monuments, and the great gardens. The influence is also seen in the art, literature, centralized governance, and tax collection. Military strategies and technology, including gunpowder once again, and artillery greatly changed with the arrival of Muslims. As previously mentioned, gunpowder originated in China, and the Muslims formulated it to produce bombs. Not a good thing. In the Muslim world, during this period, cleanliness was a priority. Its cities were safe, clean, and cosmopolitan. When Paris had a population of about 20,000, urban cities in the Muslim world had more than 400,000. There were more linguistic and cultural diversity, wealth and public libraries, schools and hospitals. Timbuktu had a population of at least 100,000. Now you know where Timbuktu is now in what you call modern day Mali. Was part of the Malian Empire actually. and also the Songhai Empire. The Islamic world influenced fashion, and some parts were known for its textiles, courtly love, amour courtois. The theme of much European medieval literature and the troubadour tradition was, if not in origin, heavily influenced by Arabian culture. Whatever the case, its European advent was in Aquitaine, southern France, toward the end of the 11th century. The influence or newly acquired tradition, that is the troubadour tradition, known as a newly acquired tradition, there I go again, would have replaced it, not would have, but it did replace the religious music of the Middle Ages, and was about love and chivalry, and was encouraged by Eleanor of Aquitaine, the granddaughter of William IX. He was the one who started it, and the mother of Richard I, the Lionheart, King of England and Duke of his beloved Aquitaine, a part of the Angevin Empire. Also known as Richard the Lionheart, and I said that already, and considered a protector of the troubadours, he was also a troubadour, lyric poet, and musician. One of Richard the Lionheart's poems in Occitan, Ja nous hons pris, something to the effect, I am a prisoner, because he wrote that while he was imprisoned in the Holy Roman Empire there, after he left the Crusades on his way back. It's available today. You can actually Google it on YouTube. I think that's cool, actually. During the Third Crusade in the Levant, upon hearing that Richard the Lionheart loved music and was a troubadour, Al-Adil, also known as Sefadin, and forgive my pronunciation, the brother and also negotiator of Saleheddini, presented him with music sung by a female singer. And in lots of people who speak English say Saladin or Saladin. The Islamic world has influenced the food, agriculture, the music, the lexicon, which means vocabulary, of the West. It introduced coffee from East Africa, cotton, sugar made from sugarcane, oranges from China, spinach, aubergine or eggplant, and asparagus into the cuisine. The many influences came through several pipelines, several conduits. Those conduits came through Sicily, Al-Andalusia, the Crusades and returning Crusaders, and Italian merchant republics like Pisa, Genova, Amalfi, Venetia, and Ragusa, that facilitated much interaction, including through trade, especially with the Levant. Christian scholars like mathematician Leonardo Fibonacci and physician and polyglot Constantine the African from Sicily traveled to Muslim lands to further their knowledge, making use of the libraries with their vast number of manuscripts and books, and exchanging ideas with Muslim scholars. Constantine translated many manuscripts from Arabic to Latin, including the works of Al-Razi. Students during the 11th and 14th centuries went to universities and other centers of learning in the Islamic world to study philosophy, sciences, astronomy, medicine, and mathematics. As in architecture, we see that Islamic civilization took from Byzantium and then Byzantium took from Islam. In architecture, there was also a give and take. Now, I covered this in my last, I think it was video 15 or 16, but I'm gonna just quickly go over it. And this is with regards to Zaryab. No Zaryab, no guitar. Cultural dynamo and influencer. He would have been an influencer. That's what you would call him if he lived today. A super dynamic influencer. When we speak of the cultural influence of the Muslim world on Western civilization, it would never be complete without the mention of a once in a blue moon cultural dynamo. Abu al-Hassan Ali ibn Nafi, also known as Zaryab, which is the Persian word for jaybird, and Mirlo, blackbird. By most accounts, Zaryab was born in Persia of mixed descent. It has been difficult to ascertain whether one half of his ancestry was Persian, Kurd, or Arab. However, there is no doubt that the other one half was black. Beginning as an accomplished musician in the Abbasid court in Baghdad, Zaryab eventually ended up in the Umayyad court in Cordoba, Al-Andalus, in the name of the region of Muslim rule in the Iberian Peninsula, which included Spain. He introduced the oud and then added a fifth string, made it lighter, and replaced the wooden pick with the talon of an eagle, thus adding longevity to the strings. This was the first guitar. We might say no Zaryab, no guitar. Zaryab founded the first music conservatory in Europe. His blending of North African and Middle Eastern music created the distinctive Andalusian sound. Flamenco evolved from the blend of the songs, dances, and music of the Middle East, North Africa, and the music of the Roma or the Romani. Zaryab introduced fine dining for the upper classes, etiquette and table manners which were non-existent in Europe, the multi-course meal beginning with soup, entree, and ending with dessert. With glass and crystal, he replaced odious Roman metal and earthenware goblets of the upper classes and redesigned the soup spoon. Much of the table manners and etiquette remain with us today. Zaryab introduced many dishes, some of which he brought from Baghdad and his stay in North Africa before arriving in the Iberian Peninsula. Others he created. He even introduced into the cuisine what was seen as a springweed, asparagus. Zaryab introduced a seasonal calendar for fashion, different colors, fabrics, and styles for each season. One might even say that he was the forerunner for fashion houses with their seasonal collections. Due to Zaryab, the trendsetter, a medieval fashion industry began making Cordoba the European capital of fashion. He was the influencer of his day in many things. Hygiene was a priority for him, and he gave to Europe its first deodorant, toothbrush, and toothpaste, and encouraged frequent baths up to twice daily. Women were introduced to the beauty parlor, cosmetology, along with depilatories, shorter haircuts, new perfumes, and cosmetics. The bang is accredited to Zaryab. He encouraged men to shave their faces, and while some of his introductions came from the grand metropolis that was Baghdad, with its many influences including India, Persia, and beyond, Zaryab created and innovated many. From North Africa, he brought Jewish doctors, and from India, astrologers and astronomers, as we mentioned earlier. These astronomers taught people in the court the game of chess, which spread along with the knowledge of astronomy. This also shows another side to Zaryab, for which he was known in Baghdad, as well as in Cordoba, where he was respected by the Emir Abd al-Rahman for the aspect that of a man of science and letters. The cultural influences and changes, along with his musical innovations of this veritable phenomenon, are too many to list here. The wind, the conduit, and innovator who was Zaryab alone is enough to disprove those who would choose to deny the contributions of Islamic civilization to Western civilization and to humanity. Blackamoors had a very strong sense of self, and most of them were literate, multilingual, urbane, and cultured. Now, blackamoors, this is the derogatory exonym, if you want to put it that way, that was given to Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula. Now, visitors to Spain saw them as being more highly cultured than the white Spaniard. Muslims in Spain were referred to as blackamoors in the Middle Ages due to their darker skin, the darker skin of most of them. The interpretation of the blackamoors, derogatory exonym, as I said, for the Moors who remained in Europe after they lost the Iberian Peninsula, and their strong sense of self, they saw that. And for example, Sir Thomas Shirley, he was English, saw that as a lack of allegiance. And so, what does that mean? That simply means that if, for example, they lived in Britain, in England, their allegiance would not be to the Queen. So you couldn't have that, and that's what Shirley meant to say. And so you would hear, other than the economic dearth that was in England, problems that they had in England at that time, you hear of Elizabeth I talking about those blackamoors. It was because she felt that their allegiance would be more to whatever their beliefs were, never ever to her, the Queen and the crown, and a country on top of that was mostly Christian. Now, knowledge is worth more than gold. Centers of learning. Learning was highly valued and a priority in the Muslim world. The Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad used the blueprint of Gundashapur in Persia to establish the House of Wisdom. Gundashapur was the intellectual center of the Sasanian Empire, Persian, during Persia's Golden Age. Scholars often visited different centers or seats of learning to exchange ideas. When we have trade, we don't just trade goods and services, we also trade ideas. So trade is extremely important. You can have trade where it's negative, like for example, if you think about what happened in with the opium wars in China, that was negative trade right there. Getting back to this now, we might call this a vast trade network of ideas, all these centers of learning. There were many significant seats of learning or intellectual capitals during the first millennium of the Islamic civilization, namely Baghdad, Egypt, Timbuktu, Damascus, and Al-Andalus. Founded in 703, Al-Zaytuna in Tunis, Tunisia, was the world's first university. However, and I'm gonna butcher this now, El Qawarin, forgive me, founded in 859 AD by Fatima al-Fihri, is actually the world's oldest functioning university, and it's in Fez, Morocco. Now, it was the first to actually confer a degree as well. The second oldest is Al-Azhar, was founded in 970 CE in Egypt, and I think Italy. The University of Bologna, I think, has the third oldest in the world. Now, Timbuktu, Sankore University, indeed, learning was highly valued in the Islamic world. This was especially true in Timbuktu, home to the famous Sankore University, perhaps the most famous of all the Islamic centers of learning during this period. Timbuktu became a fabled city, one of dreams. It was more or less like an African El Dorado to Europeans who read the descriptions of this cosmopolitan, wealthy and prosperous city of more than 100,000 inhabitants, written by the historian and world traveler Ibn Battuta, who visited Timbuktu in 1354. Timbuktu is situated in what is present day the Republic of Mali, a country in West Africa. The Sankore Mosque, one of three mosques that were important centers of learning in Timbuktu, was founded in 989 AD. With the financial support of a wealthy Malinka woman, Sankore University was added and became a world-renowned seat of learning, especially under the rule of Mansa Musa, the legendary ruler of the West African Malian Empire, believed by many to be the richest person who has ever lived. And also, Askia the Great, he ruled the Songhai, he ruled the Songhai Empire, which followed the Malian Empire, and the Songhai Empire was larger, way larger than the Malian Empire. It was to Timbuktu that many scholars and jurists flocked, coming from different parts of the Islamic world, which included parts of Europe. In addition to Sankore University, there were many other schools and institutions of learning. The students of the 200 Quranic schools, or miktabs, also worked as scribes to produce many manuscripts, because remember there was really no printing, so you had to write everything out by hand. And what you had, in, for example, one that we're going to get to shortly, in Baghdad, it was called the House of Wisdom. You had and also in Syria, Damascus, you had an awful lot of women scribes there as well. Now, so in fact, according to Brent Singleton, the acquisition of books is mentioned more often than any other display of wealth, including the building and refurbishment of mosques. So learning was so important. It was worth more than gold. Education was so important that visitors were treated like royalty to encourage them to share their knowledge with the scholars of Timbuktu. Leo Africanus, the 16th century historian, said of Timbuktu the following: "There are many judges, doctors, and clerics here, all receiving good salaries from King Askia Mohammed of the state of Songhai. He pays great respect to men of learning. There is a great demand for books, and more profit is made from the trade in books than from any other line of business." What a wonderful world. If the Canada, and I should say even more so America, or a lot of places now, even in the Muslim world, if people thought about learning and knowledge, acquiring knowledge, as they did in, for example, Timbuktu or the Islamic world during its golden ages, my God, where would conspiracy theories be? All this nonsense that we have to undergo that's causing so much havoc and misery in this world, there'll be a whole lot less of it. Knowledge is what? Power. There were other schools and institutions in addition to Sankore. Sankore was a renowned institution comprising several colleges where medicine and surgery, astronomy, mathematics, literature, physics, chemistry, Quranic and Islamic studies, law, linguistics and geography. Trades like navigation, carpentry, and fishing were also offered, as well as business and business ethics. So the vocations were also offered. That is music to my ears. The university trade shops offered classes in business, carpentry, once again, farming, fishing, construction, shoemaking, tailoring, and navigation. So they gave importance to the trades rather than having this two-tiered thing where, oh, well, you go to university, so, you're better than someone who is a carpenter or something like that. I don't subscribe to that. You do what you do because every vocation, profession is a contribution to society. An architect, he makes his plans on paper, but he needs other people to execute those plans. He needs a carpenter. He needs the mason. He needs the laborer. He needs even the cook to feed the carpenter and the mason and the laborer. So it's all very important. A world filled with architects, what would they eat? I would like to know that. So everyone is important in society. So I love this. Eminent African scholars like Mohammed Bagayogo of the Jula people and his student Ahmad Baba al-Timbukti, a Sanhaja Berber, author of more than 40 books on a variety of topics including medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and mathematics. While he was not against the institution of slavery, Ahmed Baba was an advocate for the abolition of race-based slavery and argued against the curse of Ham narrative, the tale spun by Christians and some Muslims used to justify enslaving black people. You can see my book for that. I call it the hamification of black people. He also argued against Muslims enslaving Muslims. Well, he should go a step further and argue against slavery, period. But at least that was a step. Now, Timbuktu went into decline with the Moroccan Berber invasion and the Battle of Tondibian. I have that in my book about the cows, when they used the cows to put them in front so that they would make a lot of dust, and that would blind the Moroccans who were coming down. So what happened was the Moroccans fired the guns, and then the cows turned the opposite direction and got themselves behind the Songhai army, and it was a rout. So that was a deciding battle. Now, where do we have here? This new caliphate, under the leadership of Pasha Mahmud ibn Zarqoon, obviously had no appreciation for knowledge, because many of Timbuktu's libraries were burnt to the ground, many manuscripts stolen and sent to Morocco, and much of its wealth plundered. Many of its scholars, like Ahmad the Baba and Mohammed Bagayogo, voiced their opposition and criticism against the ills they saw happening around them. Some were killed, and others, like Ahmad the Baba, were deported and sent into exile in Fez and Marrakesh. Today, Sankore University still operates, and thousands of manuscripts have been preserved. Some of those manuscripts of Ahmed Baba and Mohammed Bagayogo and other scholars from Timbuktu are housed in a museum in Paris. Now in Baghdad, another center of learning, you have the House of Wisdom called Beit al-Hikmah House. Before the destruction of Baghdad by Genghis Khan and the Mongols in 1251, I would have had a heart attack, because they said they destroyed the library and they dumped the books into the river, and it ran, the ink just covered the river. I would have had a heart attack, because books are my favorite things. So let me start again. Before the destruction of Baghdad by Genghis Khan and the Mongols in 1251, the Beit al-Hikmah, or House of Wisdom, during the Abbasid Caliphate, was the center where originals of Greek philosophical and scientific manuscripts were translated. The House of Wisdom was an academy, translation institute, and library, inspired by the Academy of Gundashapur in Persia. Caliph al-Mansur, the second Abbasid Caliph, who, according to historian, philosopher, and sociologist Ibn Khaldun, requested the mathematical works of the Greeks from Byzantine emperor, and founded the House of Wisdom in 825. Located in southwest Iran and founded by the Emperor Shapur of the Sasanian Empire, Gundashapur was known as the largest and most important learning center and intellectual hub in the ancient world at that time. This intellectual center comprised a large library, medical school, teaching hospital, and higher learning center, and attracted scholars from all over the world. The House of Wisdom became the largest translation institute, library, learning center, academy, and intellectual hub for the great minds of the era. Scholars from all over the world visited the center not only for its manuscripts but also for the exchange of ideas. The House of Wisdom became the intellectual hub for most of the greatest minds, not only throughout the Muslim world, which included Christians, Muslims, Jews, and Zoroastrians among the many, but also beyond. Christian scholars, many of them Nestorian Christians, you'd find Nestorian Christians in Syria, played a vital and invaluable role in translating the scientific and philosophical works of Greek scholars. So there you see, they are continuing with the work of Greek scholars as well. These scholar translators collected manuscripts from Egypt, Syria, and Palestine and took them to the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, in Baghdad for translation from Greek and Syriac to Arabic. The works of other scholars, including Persian, Chinese, and Indians, were also translated. One of these Nestorian scholars, and they were scholars and they were also the scribes / translators, was Iraqi Arab Hunayn ibn Ishaq. His Latin name is Johanesius, a physician and polyglot, means that he spoke a lot of languages fluently, who was a master in Greek, Arabic, Assyrian, and Persian languages. The works that Ibn Ishaq and his team translated included works of Aristotle, Homer, Plato, Hippocrates, and Galen, who is known as the father of modern medicine. Ibn Ishaq was a student of Yuhanna ibn Masawi, a Persian Slavic. His mother was Persian and Slavic. His mother was reportedly Slavic. Doesn't really matter really, but I guess it does help to show you at the same time the different ethnicities and of the people who made up what we call the Islamic civilization. He was a physician and the first head of the House of Wisdom. Ibn Masawi, forgive my pronunciation please, wrote many works on fevers, hygiene, and dietetics, and authored the first treatise on ophthalmology. Many of the works translated by these scholars from Greek, Syriac to Arabic, Aramaic/Hebrew would later be translated to Latin there, so it's going back again, in Sicily and Spain. Now, Hippocrates, as I mentioned before, took much from ancient Egypt, and I'm just going to add this here. Now, he took much, Hippocrates, you have the Hippocratic Oath that comes from him that doctors have to swear by. So Hippocrates took much from the medicine of ancient Egypt. Now, as far as I gather, he didn't really have much respect for women. Like, women were sort of like a who cares, right? Sort of thing. They weren't important. Lots of people before always thought, well, if women were ill, it's because they're hysterical and what have you. Now, the thing is, Egyptian medicine, and you think of the first female physician that they know of, I think her name was Peseshet, and she is from around 2550 BCE, during the time of, I think, Khafre and his father, the builders of the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. She was also the female physician, and in charge of funeral rites to the king's mother, the pharaoh's mother. Now, women like her and other healers slash physicians, what Hippocrates had from ancient Egypt, they were some of the writers and the scientists of these medical works. And they conducted experiments. They made observations and came to their conclusions. They were competent, and they didn't distinguish in ancient Egypt between male doctor and female doctor, because when you'd go into the tombs, you'd find the tools of their trade. So you'll get the scalpels and all the stuff that they use in both male and female tombs. But then, I just had to mention that, and to think Hippocrates didn't think much of women. But then a lot of what he was using, well, guess who came up with those, if you want to call them remedies? Guess who came up with all those observations and conclusions and those medicines? Women, along with men. So let me get back here. Just thought I'd add that. Now, how much? Okay, so I go on here to say, however, much that he took, right, from ancient Egypt, the formulations, observations, and other work were done, once again, as I said, by women. Ancient Egypt approached medicine in a holistic way. There are lots of things that, as you read through some of what they wrote, you'd say, it sounds like a whole bunch of, like it really would never work. But they made a lot of sense in most of the things. They combined the spiritual, the mental, and the physical. It was a holistic way of practicing medicine. And imagine, they were before Aristotle, and they were doing empirical studies, as opposed to Aristotle, who would just, he didn't conduct experiments and gather data and all of that stuff, and make observations and come to draw a conclusion. He didn't do that. He just, I guess, seeing is enough without going further. Now, in addition to translator scholars, one of these great minds was Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, who joined the Beit al-Hikmah in the early 9th century. We mentioned him before. Not only building on and expanding on the work of the Greek mathematician Diophantus of Alexandria, the Muslim Persian polymath, geographer, astronomer, and mathematician al-Khwarizmi also built on the original Hindu system and extended it to include fractions. Known as one of the most influential mathematicians, if not the most, of all times, and the father of algebra, he wrote a treatise on algebra. It was called Hisab al-Jabr wal Muqabala. Is the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing, in which he introduced the first systematic solution to linear and quadratic equations. The book was used as a standard text in Europe for 400 years. In addition to being the first to treat algebra as a separate branch in mathematics, he also contributed much to trigonometry. He also invented algorithm. a branch of mathematics that derives its name from his hometown. He wrote treatises on geography, astronomy, and other areas as well. And without the algorithm that he invented, we would not have computers and possibly computer science today. Now, the third center of learning was Al-Andalus, Cordoba, Spain in the Iberian Peninsula, the one that I will mention, because you had other centers, but I'm just mentioning just these three. Now, Cordoba, Al-Andalus, was another center or seat of learning with more than 600,000 books, manuscripts in its municipal library. It was also a cultural capital in the Muslim world, and there is not a shred of doubt that Zaryab played perhaps the most significant role in establishing Cordoba, Andalus, as the cultural center in not only the Muslim world, but the rest of Europe as well by the 10th century. According to the historian James Clue, there was nothing like it at that epoch in the rest of Europe. The best minds in that continent looked to Spain for everything, which most clearly differentiates a human being from a tiger. That's interesting. That's an interesting observation. Towards the end of the 11th century, there was an influx of students from the rest of Europe into Cordoba to study medicine, science, and philosophy. When they did return to their home country, it would not be only with a degree and knowledge, but also, as Lebling says, this is another historian, art, music, cuisine, fashion, and manners. Imagine, manners. These universities, schools, libraries, and hospitals found throughout the Islamic world would become the blueprint for similar institutions that would spring up in Europe as it rose from the slumber of the Dark Ages. No doubt, the Muslim reign in the Iberian Peninsula had a significant influence on Queen Isabel of Spain, or Isabella, rather, of Spain, who emphasized learning and scholarship after the expulsion of the Moors. Now we go on to the scholars, and I'm looking at the time. Maybe I'll continue on until I finish rather than make another video. Now the scholars, Muslim scholars, kept alive the works and knowledge of Greek and other philosophers, scientists, and scholars, but they also further developed and enriched them, as Al-Khwarizmi did in mathematics. Muslim scholars developed new areas and fields of study. These scholars developed and or enhanced much in the scientific fields, including the incorporation of surgery and medicine, and many of the modern surgical instruments in use today. The technique of inoculation, as we saw with Onesimus and smallpox, pinhole camera, the field of ophthalmology and chemistry, alchemy, with its different procedures and equipment, the crankshaft, and the list goes on. Amongst these Islamic scholars were Abu Musa Jabir ibn Hayyan, Abu Bakr al-Razi, and Abu Yusuf Yahub ibn Ishaq al-Kindi. Forgive me for butchering the names. Now, Abu Musa Jabir ibn Hayyan was a Shia religious scholar, philosopher, alchemist, and chemist, whose interest also extended to magic. He was the author of the oldest known systematic classification of chemical substances and was also known for being the first to derive inorganic compounds from organic substances by chemical means. Abu Yusuf Yahub ibn Ishaq al-Kindi, considered one of the 12 greatest minds, was a philosopher, and that's according to Sarton in 1927, was a philosopher, mathematician, music theorist, physician, and polymath, who was the first Muslim scholar, philosopher to use and develop Greek philosophy. His works had a profound influence on the intellectual development of Western Europe during the 13th century. And now we go to another dynamo, Abu Bakr al-Razi. Abu Bakr al-Razi wore many hats, including that of philosopher, alchemist/chemist, music theorist, pharmacist, physician, and medical ethicist. He built upon the legacies of Greek and Roman physicians like Hippocrates and Galen. Al-Razi was the first to distinguish measles from smallpox, the first to write about immunology and allergies, first to identify fever as a defense mechanism, also considered the father of pediatrics. He contributed to many advances in ophthalmology and invented, among other instruments, spatulas, flasks, mortar, and files. All those are very important, like when you're doing experiments and in chemistry and all of that. He also proposed the theory that absolute time was a never-ending flow. Now, I speak about absolute time being a never-ending flow. I go into that in one of my books, actually one of my first books, Another World Through the Eyes of the Soul. That one was written in 2004, but it's been revised, so there's a second edition that's available now. Unlike Aristotle and his method of deduction in scientific inquiry, Muslim scientists laid down the foundation for modern sciences based on experimentation rather than mere speculation. At the end of the Dark Ages, Roger Bacon, a Franciscan monk greatly influenced by Al-Razi, advanced experimental science and its empiricism. He and his teacher, statesman, philosopher, theologian, and scientist Robert Grosseteste, are recognized as early proponents of the modern scientific method. Now we go on to Al-Nafis, Abu al-Sina, and Kharshi ibn al-Nafis. Three other important scholars are Al-Nafis, Abu al-Sina, and in the 13th century Cairo, Syrian Kharshi ibn al-Nafis, who was the first person to describe pulmonary circulation of blood 400 years before Europeans. Persian physician and philosopher Abu al-Sina wrote about stroke, dementia. This is, like around the late 900 to about 1037 AD. We're talking about these time frames, up to 1300 AD. So Alicina wrote about stroke, dementia, and the contagious nature of infectious disease, and quarantine as an effective method to limit their spread in his comprehensive book. I'm going to butcher the name again, Al-Qanun fi al-Tib, Canon of Medicine. Alicina suggested that clinical trials of new medicines should be done to determine both efficacy and side effects before they were used by the general population. This was definitely a step in the right direction, as opposed to rubbing the rump of a live chicken on a bubo to draw out the poison in a plague, as was common practice in Europe during this period. Think about that. And what of women? Women scholars during this period. What about them? We should not have to separate women from men, but 'tis the world in which we live, right? Where we segregate, we go into groups according to race, gender, color, ethnicity, and all of this stuff. So, well, let's go to women, right? Many of the scribes in the different centers of learning were female, like male patrons of education and learning. The Caliph al-Mansur of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad during the early years of the Islamic civilization, and Mansa Musa in Mali, and Askia Muhammad in Songhai, there were also female patrons. The first university, Al-Khawarizm University in Fez, Morocco, and Sankore in Timbuktu, Mali, are the result of the patronage of women. In the case of Timbuktu, we know that a wealthy Malinka woman provided the financial support to add Sankore University to the Sankore Mosque in Timbuktu. Fatima Al-Firi, born in Tunisia, is reputed to have used her inheritance from both her father and her husband to fund the building of the university. We might mention here that some historians like Ian D. Morris have questioned the historicity of the origin of the university and its affiliation with Fatima. Well, it did exist at that time. I guess that's not what he's questioning, but perhaps he's questioning whether Fatima was involved. I just thought I'd put that there, let you know that there's historians sometimes disagree. Not sometimes, a lot of times they disagree in how they interpret things and facts. So, I just thought I'd put that side there. Now, we have, I'm going to look at 3 female scholars from that period. Okay, so what we have here is Al-Ijliya bint Al-Ijli was one of the few women scholars who made a name for herself during the Islamic Golden Age. The Baghdad-based scientist is credited with manufacturing an important astronomical instrument known as astrolabes. These were circular discs that looked like handheld models of the universe. Astrolabes are a navigation tool as well, and we can use it to find stars, calculate dates and times, distances and heights. The compass, okay, shows the direction, okay, while the astrolabe or astrolabe tells you where you are relative to the stars. It tells you where the stars are. It helps you to find stars as well. Now, Lubna, a calligrapher, library master, and we can say slash curator, mathematician, and traveler. During the second half of the 10th century, scholar and calligrapher Lubna of Cordoba, a former Spanish slave, was an advisor to the Caliph of Cordoba court, as well as the copyist, library master slash curator for the vaunted Library of Cordoba al-Andalus. She was also a poet and beloved mathematician who reputedly taught math to children outside of the palace. As library master, she was required to travel the Islamic realm to find books to add to the library, thus becoming what would appear to be one of the first solo female travelers throughout the Muslim world. So it wasn't just Ibn Battuta or Khaldun who were traveling. There was a female, Lubna, she was also traveling. Now, Rufaida al-Aslamia was a nurse, surgeon, and mobile. She founded a medical mobile unit. Rufaida al-Aslamia was one of the early converts in Medina to Islam during the 7th century. She's recognized as the world's first nurse and female surgeon in Islam. Rufaida provided medical care to communities with what is the world's first documented mobile medical units. In addition to training other women nurses, she and her team also provided medical care on the battlefield as Islam spread. Many of the scribes, once again, in Baghdad and Damascus were women. Non-Muslims in the Islamic world, there were, of course, many non-Muslims. Now, as previously mentioned, the Islamic civilization was one of plurality. Muslim societies, usually more tolerant. Now, let me finish this, then I'll say. There were non-Muslims who made great contributions living in Muslim societies, as was evident in the House of Wisdom and other centers of learning, if you will recall. There were also, for example, Zoroastrian and Jewish scholars in the House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah in Baghdad. Maimonides was one such man. Moshe ben Maimon, known as Maimonides or Rambam, a Sephardic rabbi, astronomer, philosopher, and physician, was born in Andalusia, in what is now Spain. Muslim society in the Iberian Peninsula was mostly a tolerant one towards Christians and Jews. Now, tolerant means that, for me anyways, that, you tolerate someone, you're not as good as I am, or what you do is not as good, but, I'll ignore you, I'll tolerate you. Now, for me, the ultimate is respect, right? Respect is between equals. Now, usually, non-Muslims were required to pay a special tax, a jizya, for protected status. though socially lower in the social hierarchy. See what I mean? However, well, it's much better than, I suppose, just outright, kill you or chase you out, right? However, with a change in dynasty, when Maimonides was 10 years old, the protected status, which they call dhimmi, of minorities was abolished, and Jews and Christians were forced to convert or face expulsion or death. So it was for Maimonides and his family, who went first, they chose to leave, went first to Morocco and then to Egypt, also under Muslim rule, but different dynasties or caliphates, right? In Egypt, he became the personal physician, and his road to becoming a physician is an interesting one, but I won't cover this one. You can probably Google that and find out. He didn't want to become a physician, but I guess circumstances forced him to do that. He preferred being a rabbi and philosopher than medicine. But thank God he did do it, because we got a lot from him. Now, he was also he became the personal physician of Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub and Saladin, right? Or Saladin, some people say. He had great respect for Maimonides, and there's a story they tell that made his respect even greater, about the poison, like something to do with poison, because he was an expert with poison, and then he had a rival, and on and on and on. Now, there is a story. Most historians, some historians say yes, and then the I can't remember his name. I think it's Gallingham, I think, who's an expert. He is the foremost expert on Richard the Lionheart, and there's a story. He says that it's not really true, that Maimonides administered to Richard while he was in the Levant during the Crusades, because he was very ill, actually. I forget the name of the illness that he had. Well, they can't really pinpoint the exact thing, but it's, your teeth fall out, your hair, and all of this. Could you imagine Richard? He was so vain. He was such a dashing individual, and teeth gone, hair gone, this tall Norman. Could you imagine? But in any case, that side of the debate says it didn't. He stayed mostly in Egypt. But it is possible he might have made a trip to Jerusalem, although they do say he only visited Jerusalem once, and that was a long time before then. But anyhow, getting back to the topic, that's for another time. We will revisit it. I promise you, I will revisit it, perhaps in another book. Now, during this time, when Richard was ill, and I will say Saladin, we know the different pronunciation, was also sent Richard Lionheart. They had a very interesting relationship as enemies, rivals, right? Sent him fresh fruits and snow ice to cool his drinks and his fever. It would have been with this encounter, perhaps, or maybe if he did not meet Maimonides, perhaps he heard of what was good, and it was something that Maimonides would probably have recommended to maybe Saladin or his brother, as a cure for whatever ailment it was. And Richard would have learned then about the value of fresh air, and he would continue being obsessed with fresh air in several of his lifetimes. And as I said, another book will detail those lifetimes. Now, a preeminent Torah scholar, Maimonides wrote 10 important medical treatises. He wrote medical aphorisms of Moses, Pirkei Moshe, and forgive my pronunciation again, which compiles 1,500 aphorisms from Greco-Persian sources covering topics such as anatomy, pathology, diagnosis, and therapeutics. In his regimen of health, Regimen Sanitatis, a pioneering work in psychosomatic medicine, Maimonides emphasized preventive medicine and the integration of mental and physical health. Sounds like what the Egyptians were onto as well. He was a foremost expert on poisons. Remember I mentioned poison and that story with that man, and that garnered the admiration of Saladin, right? And their antidotes, and wrote the treatise on poisons and their antidotes. That's the name of that particular treatise. He linked asthma to climate, diet, and environmental concerns, stressed the importance of treating patients and not disease, and the importance of preventative medicine diet. Our body, for Maimonides, is indeed our temple, because without our temple, we don't exist. How can we go through life? So your health, your body is our temple. Now you understand that you've got to take care of your body. According to McGrill and Secaron, Maimonides had, quote, an early but accurate view on hemorrhoids. Now, we're almost done here. I, like most people, forget about who I call the oft forgotten, and I'm going to pay a tribute to them, and I did a little bit before. We must not forget the tradesmen and others who applied the knowledge and theory of all these scholars. Without carpenters, stone cutters, and masons, hewers of wood, if you want to say that, and water carriers, how could those blueprints become the Dome of the Rock, the mosques, the libraries, hospitals, and palaces, and cities? How could all of those become realities? Knowledge not applied is useless. It just stays on the paper. Before actions and words, there must be thought. Without farmers and cooks and housewives, who would feed and sustain the bodies of those carpenters or the minds of those philosophers, right? Without the artists, the musicians, the dancers and singers, who would provide the entertainment, the respite to relieve us of our stress and feed the soul? Everyone plays a part. We are all contributors to civilization. And I will tell you just a brief story. Some years ago, I was in the hospital with one of my sons. He was in there for quite a few weeks. And I shared a cot in his room. Well, I had a cot, I should say, not share one. He was in his bed and I was on a cot. And it was a Saturday evening, and it was about 6:30, one of the cleaning staff, a member of the cleaning staff, came in. She did what she had to do, change the garbage, if she had to mop or whatever. And as she was leaving, I said, "Thank you very much. Have a good night." And my son also said, "Thank you. Have a good night." And she had opened the door to go, and she turned. She closed the door, and she said, "Oh, I'm the one who should be thanking you." She said, "I've been here since 6:30 or 7 this morning. And this is the first time someone has actually said thank you." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yes." Sorry. People never generally do. I thought about that. And I'm sure they say thank you to the doctors. Most of us say thank you to the doctors, thank you to the nurse. But we never say thank you to the cleaning staff. Now, if the cleaning staff doesn't do what it's supposed to do, what they're supposed to do, could you imagine? Could you imagine all those diseases, bacteria, virus spreading, and all the things that you associate or can result from a place that's not hygienic? Everyone in this life or other should be respected and thanked. If you have someone working with you or for you, as some people would say, they offer you a service and you pay them. They're doing what you don't want to do or can't do or have no time to do. So we all need each other. The doctor is needed just as the farmer is. And the farmer is needed just as the doctor is. And we tend to know how people are by the way they treat people they believe are beneath them. So imagine, I'm sure all those people said, "Thank you, Dr. So-and-so." And to the nurse, "Thank you." But you pass by the person who cleans, keeps the hospital clean, and saves you from some outbreak of something, and you don't even notice them. So next time, remember, each of us has a place. Each of us is as important as the next, and each vocation is as important as another. And I just had to say that because that's one of my pet peeves. And if you know and believe in the truth of reincarnation and its facts, today you might be the king of the country, of a country, and then in another subsequent lifetime, or perhaps in prior lifetimes, you were a hobo, just like me. So I've walked many miles in many shoes in this lifetime and in other lifetimes, and will do so in lifetimes to come. Everybody and everything everyone does, once it's positive, contributes to civilization. And I guess that's enough of that. Now let me get to the finish here. Now, so we're going to conclude with this. The Islamic world, once again, let's summarize, was not homogeneous or homogeneous, depends on whether you're English or American. It comprised many different cultures, races, languages, empires, dynasties. Islam revived, disseminated, expanded knowledge from Greek scholars and others. It also developed much. We must also remember that Greeks took much from ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt also took from others. As the Muslim world took from not only Greece and India, we have seen that it also left much in other societies, including those from which it had taken. It would give much to Europe in different areas. Those who were at the forefront represented different masks of religion, race, ethnicity, and gender. So you had Zoroastrian Jola as Muhammad Bayayogo, Berber as Ahmad Baba, Arab, Mongol, Assyrian, male and female, and the list goes on. That was the Islamic civilization, and the evidence is all around us today in mathematics, including the numeral system, algorithm, the intricate and fundamental role it plays in computer science and computers, business, hospitals, libraries, education, surgery, and other areas of medicine like optometry, ophthalmology, diseases, fashion, fine dining, personal grooming, hygiene, astronomy, leisure activities such as chess, physics, and chess. And then you have physics, agriculture, culinary arts, chemistry, astronomy, and many other branches of science. It is in our lexicon, right? Coffee, chemistry, oranges, actually, sugar, actually. We take it from Spanish, but the Spanish is originally from Arabic. Sugar, the name sugar. It's in architecture, as I said before, and the list goes on. As previously stated, we choose to detail contributions from Islam and its different people groups, and the contributions they have made, because current supremacists, true to their ideology and practices, offer revisionism and erasure and made-up history in the Western world, and that includes the extreme Zionists, be they Christians, Christofascists, and Jews. Zionist Jews, most Jews are not Zionists, or of whatever stripe, push the narrative that Muslims are backward peoples and that only they, white Europeans, and according to Israel, Judeo, and their descendants in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and America, white European Christians or of white European Christian descent, have contributed to the progress of civilization, while for centuries Black people, Romanian Jews, have always been targets and still are targets for persecution, racism, bigotry. Racism is part of bigotry. Muslims have now, especially since 9/11, become the targets of white supremacists and other right-wing groups and governments, including the Christofascists, Hindu nationalists, Buddhist nationalists, Zionist Christians, and Israeli Zionists. It is clear that the Muslim world for many centuries, the leader in the acquisition and advancement of knowledge, was at the heights of greatness with its technological and scientific advancements. The emphasis on charity, public education, hygiene, safety, and tolerance made most of the societies comprising the Muslim world civilized. We cannot forget the fact of slavery that was practiced in most places throughout the world, and the Muslim world was no different. And as a matter of fact, slavery was still being practiced up well into the 20th century. Mauritania, I believe, was the last one to officially abolish slavery, and that was, I think, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, somewhere there. Overall, okay, there was indeed an Islamic civilization. As we look towards much of the Muslim world today, we see an onslaught on education and knowledge, as in the case of Afghanistan. America is on the same trajectory and is moving quite quickly towards what I call Talibanization. We also chose to go into details to show how societies crumble when there's an onslaught on knowledge, as we are now witnessing in America and Afghanistan and in places in the Muslim world. This is the cycle of light and darkness that awaits every society, and darkness that we can consciously witness in real time. America, unfortunately, is one of the evidence that we are faced with. Now, the Islamic world is now a shell of its former self, but so are many other civilizations, kingdoms, and empires. The fields of history are littered with their corpses. This is just an example of what history teaches us, that kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall, but are not guaranteed to rise again. The Assyrian Empire was one of the few that managed to rise again after its fall, only to fall again. Now, finally, through the temporal lens, we have seen, with the examples given, that civilizations feed upon and learn from each other. Merchant towns like Amalfi and Genova, merchants and trade, not just in goods, but in ideas. And those ideas help societies learn from each other. Travelers like Pope Sylvester II, the Crusaders, Lubna, Zaryab also bring different ideas to add and improve existing knowledge. That's what they did. And culture in a society. We see the butterfly that Islamic civilization was. And then we see the spread of different food staples from one part of the world to many other parts. How vital are the goggles? How vital was the iron technology of the enslaved people, used to enrich and empower their enslavers? All of us, once again, have contributed to civilization, and so we can have a Saladin contributing to Islamic civilization in his masked gender, male masked religion, Muslim masked ethnicity, Kurd, and masked sultan and caliphate. During the Third Crusade, we must recall that in our understanding, civilization does not just mean greatness, but also humane. And the energy that was Saladin displayed this in his generosity, purportedly giving away most of what he had to his citizens and not having enough for his funerary obligations. Jerusalem under his rule was welcoming to different faiths. Today, Jerusalem, under the rule of Zionist Jews, does not welcome different faiths, as it attempts to erase both Christians and Muslims. And yes, technically they say they do, but they don't. They lock the Muslims out of Al-Aqsa. They spit upon Christians. They've burnt down Christian churches, and of course they burnt all the mosques. They've leveled Gaza. So technically, that's what they say, but that's not what they do. And then I say now, contrary to what ill-informed American Zionist Christians have been bamboozled and gaslit to believe, that strange bedfellow relationship that have lasted for decades is finally unraveling. That's strange bedfellows with the Zionist Jews. Each one's thinking about at the end, one subjugating the other, or the other, well, if you don't convert, well, you die. They have got more than enough help from Palestinian people, and the facade has fallen. Now, they have got more than enough help from this unholy alliance, as the Zionist Christians have helped in no insignificant way to hold American administrations, both Republican and Democratic, and their corrupt politicians hostage to provide the arms, political, and international cover to Israel in their genocide of the Palestinian people, especially children and babies. Christians are harassed, as I said, churches burnt. History teaches us that thief and thief God laughs. God laughs when he sees two thieves in cahoots. Or dog named dog. Dog eat dog. Supremacist ideology and practices. Indeed, cannibalistic. Now I like to end with this. And as I like to say, I have been harsh, but I offer no apologies. Me now go put me mouth a ground for talk, left me make me talk. I will say what I have to say. When I speak with moral clarity, but it's might be harsh, but it's to exhort us to do better and know that we all live in glass houses and none of us without blemish. I'm full of blemishes. Hate hitching a ride. Hate a contagion, a cancer metastasizing, an opportunistic bacteria, the cloud waiting to block the sun. Hate waiting to hitch a ride on the train of love. Hate the rat on its rat passage, hitching a ride on the boat to a plague. Hate the bedbug waiting for our suitcase. Hate the roach riding on our coattails. Hate the shadow always lurking behind, sometimes longer than us. Hate just lurking behind the thin curtain, waiting for its turn on center stage to take us to a place not so far away. A blast back from civilization to barbarism, from knowledge back to ignorance, from wisdom back to impudence. Hate never takes a holiday, always looking for the opportunity to hitch a ride on the train of love. Hate inhabits the same house as love within us. And then we must remember that God the Creator, that something that is greater than us, never bequeathed unto any of us any lands. And he has no chosen people. And he does not need, that something that is greater than us does not need any one of us to fight on its behalf or for that something that is greater than us. That's ludicrous, that's ridiculous. If so, that something that is greater than us would not be greater than us. Never believe anyone who tells you that God gave them any land or that they're chosen people. That something that is greater than us is not selective and partial, vindictive and cruel. We're all tenants on this earth, not here to have dominion or to rule over anything or anyone. We're not here to have dominion over the fowl of the air, the fish in the sea, or the beasts on the fields, in the fields. We're not here to rule and have supremacy over our brothers. Let us be good tenants. Let us take care of ourselves and of each other. Let us trod ever so lightly and take care of this planet we call Earth and all the creatures that dwell thereon. Remember that something that is greater than us, that is the fatherhood of God. We respect and show our love for that something that is greater than us by loving ourselves and our brothers without condition, unconditionally. May we never try to free our conscience so that we will always do correct actions. May we learn to walk a mile in our brother's shoes so that we can see the humanity in each other. May we respect the differences in each other and know that our Creator has no chosen few. May we find comfort in the knowledge that each of us is slated for redemption and none is excluded. May we find solace in the knowledge that it is not a question of if, but one of when. Each of us shall return to the Father. May we know that we are just tenants on this earth and take care of each other, the earth and all the creatures that dwell thereon. May we always adhere to the divine principles of the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. Love. That which I do unto my brother, I do unto myself, for I am what? I am my brother's keeper. May the tiny shrouds of light forever illuminate our path through the dark. May peace forever reside within us and between us. One divine, universal love.